lot of people say that 2020 is one of the most worst years ever thus far. Right now, it is late June. We're pretty much slap bang in the middle of 2020. And people hate it. They say it's awful. Not just because of the pandemic, but social unrest, civil unrest, etc., etc. And a lot of people are saying, what happened? Where did this come from? I can't believe how bad this year is. But to me, personally, apart from Corona, which was really the only unpredictable part of this year, everything else, the political unrest, the social unrest, is pretty much expected. It's not a surprise to me in the slightest. The Western world right now, is pretty much in a state of warfare. Not warfare like tanks or planes or bombs or anything like that, like you would see in the Middle East or something like that, but ideas, politics, people hating their neighbours, people hating their governments, people not trusting their governments. It's a sort of war of words, a war of ideas. And there are two big factions in this sort of war of ideas that are coming to the forefront. On one hand, you have the far left, and then you have everyone else. These are the two factions as I see it, of course. Some people would say, oh, you're biased or whatever. I don't think it's bias. I think this is just really how it is. And let me give people a history lesson for those who don't understand what's going on right now. So all of this started, for those who are confused about why the world is in the state that it's in and why everything seems to be falling apart, this sort of clown world situation that we're in where nothing really makes sense anymore. So after World War II, obviously the Third Reich, the Nazis, were defeated. And after that, the world sort of went in the American direction. The idea of civil liberties, freedom of speech, the right to express yourself. Far-right ideologies such as fascism was frowned upon. But not only that, because the far-left ideology of communism, which was then ran by the Soviet Union, was still around. It wasn't defeated in World War II. It was only defeated in the Cold War, which was many, many decades later. And so after World War II, Europe, or any European country, was essentially, it was no longer a superpower. There hasn't been a superpower in Europe now for almost a century. The United Kingdom, Great Britain, the British Empire, whatever you want to call it, which was pretty much the largest, or the most powerful country in Europe at the time, completely lost most of its power. It diminished as it's still a powerful country, but nowhere near a superpower. Absolutely not. World War II demolished Britain. It could no longer keep hold of its colonies. It had to let them go. Even countries that it could have necessarily kept, it gave away. It basically became a masochist country. It lost all of its power, and America took its place on the world stage as the premier Western superpower. But not only that, World War II also established the Soviet Union as the sort of counter superpower, another superpower, unrivaled in the eastern part of the world. And obviously the United States and the Soviet Union were opposite countries. And the United States believed in capitalism, the Soviet Union believed in a sort of absurd version of communism. And so the Western world went in the American direction, as I said earlier, and the Eastern world went in the sort of communist direction. And this still shows today. I mean, if you look at the map of the world, not strictly, it's not strictly true, but the Western countries in Europe were pretty much all styled on the American sort of worldview, and the Eastern European countries were styled on the Soviet worldview, and that's the Iron Curtain and all of that stuff. You take a look at China as well. The world was essentially split in two. And we all know what happened in the Cold War, of course, or at least we think we do, which is where, of course, the United States won, and capitalism won, and communism fell apart, and as of 2020, there's basically no real communist states out there. And I guess you could say North Korea, but North Korea even denounced communism and it made its own ideology, the juche, or something like that. So you would think on paper, okay, well, communism lost, capitalism won, the Soviet Union collapsed in 91, it broke up into many countries, the US is still around. Well, we all know what happened. The Cold War was a big victory for the United States, the Western world, and capitalism, right? Well, in a way, yeah, but not really. In fact, it's my view that no one really won the Cold War. At least it was kind of a sort of neutral ending, really. And you might say, what? How can you think that? How can you think that the Cold War was neutral when one ideology and country collapsed and the other one is still thriving and is still number one today? And the reason for that is because, yes, though in 91 the Soviet Union collapsed and communism collapsed, look at the Western world and look at the United States today. How did the United States and the Western European countries collapse the Soviet Union? How did that happen? Well, we all know about the Berlin Wall. We did it by outside pressure. The country collapsed in on itself because communism and the way that the Soviet version of it didn't work, right? So the country was collapsing anyway, and we took advantage of that by adding outside pressure. And not only that, but because capitalism does work in that way, America managed to achieve many, many things, having all the largest companies in the world, and with that comes a lot of soft power and a lot of clout. But what do you think the Soviets were doing to try to destroy America? Do you think they were just sitting on their hands while America destroyed them and the rest of the world destroyed them? Do you think that they were just like, oh, well, we're done for, I guess we just hold on as long as possible? No, of course not. You see, after the nuclear weapons were invented, after World War II, and the reason the Cold War was a Cold War and not a hot war was because nuclear weapons would be devastating if used in a war. It would be mutually assured destruction. It would be mad. And so warfare changed. You couldn't just go in there with a big army, guns blazing, and take over a country, which is probably what would have happened had the nuclear weapon not been made. No, you had to be smart now. Warfare changed. The nuke changed everything. And the Soviets knew this. And so what they ended up doing was they went into America sort of like espionage, by stealth. And they had a plan to take down America, not from the outside, as America did to the Soviets, but from the inside. And so what the KGB and all of the other sort of Russian intelligence did to try to destroy their greatest enemy, the United States, was they went in and they devised a plan. And the plan, you've got to imagine it like a sort of, there's different institutions that make a country a country. If I ask you what makes your country, it's not the flag, it's not the anthem, it's not the name, it's its institutions. It's the education system, the media, the entertainment. When you go from one country to another, it's these things that you notice, right? The flag and the name or whatever is irrelevant. It's the culture that's important, the law, the law and order, things like this. And they recognize, you've got to imagine them like a pillar. I always use this example. You ever seen those old Greek buildings or Roman buildings that are like, they're made of pillars and they've got a roof on top? Well, if you saw off all those pillars, the roof's going to collapse, and the roof, in this case, is the metaphorical country. And so, if you destroy each institution, the country will collapse, and that was pretty much their plan. And so they had an idea to take over all of the institutions of America. Remember, from the inside, from the inside, not from the outside. So it's the Americans turning on the Americans. It's not the Soviets doing it. Well, they are behind it, but it's the Americans themselves. Get them to destroy their own country, to destroy their own institutions, without them even realizing it. Useful idiots, as they were called. And so, and you can see the results of this today. This was one of the biggest successes ever. It's like the biggest Trojan horse in history, what the Soviets did to the United States. And so if you look at America today, the media, who was made to inform the public, now misinforms the public. The American media is the most anti-American media ever. They're more pro-China than anything. Any enemy of America, any serious enemy of America, the American media will support. The exact opposite of what a media is kind of expected to do. Right? There's no loyalty anymore. What about the education system? Or more the lack of it? You know, obviously I'm not American, I'm British, but the results of this can be seen here as well, and everywhere else in the Western world. You know, I went to college to learn how to program, and I ended up in a class that I didn't sign up for called sociology. And sociology, for those who don't know, is, I still don't know what the hell it is, because all we ever got taught was Marxism, essentially. It was sold to me. It was a topic you kind of had to take. You had to take 3 topics, and that was my last one. It was sold to me like a sort of fun class where you can learn about politics. From day one, it was Marxist brainwashing. They don't teach you about what both sides, but and then you make your mind up. They teach you one side and say that's right, and if you don't like it, you're a bigot. I was taught all about feminism. Oh, by the way, the professor had a Chinese flag in the corner of his room. That says everything that you ever need to know. It was basically brainwashing. And so all across America and the Western world, education, especially higher education, is now basically brainwashing. They don't teach you what you want to learn, useful skills. I went there to learn how to program. I ended up learning about gender theory. So the education system completely taken over. You will good luck trying to learn something useful and not get tied into these useless fake Marxist topics that are absolutely everywhere. And because they have taken over education, the people who go there and get these useless pieces of paper called degrees, they actually think that they're intelligent, which is the most laughable thing on the planet. It's like giving an ogre a crown and then calling him the king of the world. It's like the ogre will believe it because they're a fool. A lot of people who they shouldn't be stepping foot into a college do now, because they've lowered the standards so much, because the purpose is not to educate, it's to indoctrinate. What else have we got? Entertainment. What about my favourite form of entertainment is obviously computer games. Recently a game has come out that's caused great controversy, only in the last few days, The Last of Us Part 2, which has a scene in it where you can fuck a transvestite. Great. And this is a zombie game, by the way. A zombie game based in an apocalypse where there's a transvestite and they're having intercourse. It doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't have to make sense. Because the game it's not really a zombie game. It's propaganda dressed up as a zombie game. And it's not just games, it's movies, it's music, it's absolutely every form of entertainment has been taken over. What about law? In the UK, right now, if you say certain things or do certain things, you will end up being fined or end up in jail. I watched a video a few days ago by Count Dankula, who is going to court and had to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds that he's had to fundraise just to get his criminal record revoked because his dog did a Nazi salute. This is the world we live in right now. Every single institution has been corrupted. And this is by design. This was by the KGB design. This wasn't by accident. And I always say to people, look up Yuri Bezmenov, listen to what this guy had to say. For those who don't know, he was a KGB agent who basically explained in depth how this works. And the recording was made in 1984, and it's chilling if you listen to it today, because that was 30 years ago. And what he said back then, which was laughed at and mocked, by the way, is completely accurate today. It sends shivers down your spine when you hear how accurate his predictions were. Because he was one of the guys doing it. That was his job. And he even says himself that he can't believe how much of a success the demoralization of America and the West was. These countries, the United States, all the Western European countries, which are factually, without doubt, some of the best countries to live in the world, the highest standards in pretty much all regards. Sure, of course, it's not perfect. Every country has problems, but I would rather live in these countries than anywhere else. And are only this good because of the conservative ideals that made them this good, are destroying themselves from the inside. It's outside forces as well, but mostly because it's sort of like this. You ever seen those cartoons where they've got a string and at the end they've got a bomb, and the person lights the string and then the string sort of sets on fire and then the bomb explodes. That's where we are now. It's like the string is almost to the point where the bomb is going to explode. And the Soviets lit that, but it's the people who aren't blowing it out because they're indoctrinated. All aspects of society are taken over. And the reason I focus on the United States so much, not only because it is basically the Western superpower. It is the represent. All other Western countries are basically America's bitch, and that's coming from a Brit. So you know I don't want to admit that, but it is true, whether we like it or not. The reason I'm focusing on the United States is because the Americans are so open about what they believe, and they're very, very. There's no hesitation, right? Other countries are a lot more reserved, a lot more quiet. Whereas Americans have it instilled in them, that you can say what you want, you will not get in trouble for it. Freedom of speech, this is your God-given right, etc., etc. Whereas other countries don't have that. In the UK, a lot of people are scared to speak their mind because basically our government is anti-British. They do not like certain ideas. They do not like certain people. You will be punished if you believe a certain thing. In America, you don't have this problem, and so it's a great indicator of where the world's going because people don't feel like they have someone breathing down the neck, unlike in lesser countries like the UK. So this sort of all comes together in that in countries that are very demoralized and very hesitant, like European countries, like the UK and Germany, what is going to happen in these countries is pretty obvious to me, and that's nothing. I think that in countries where the civilians aren't in charge, it's like a perception issue, right? If you live in a country where you view the government as your sort of slaves, your minions, like the Americans do, that's healthy. If you view the governments as like your leaders, sort of like they own you, as is the case in the UK. Like, do you look up to the government or do you look down to the government? In America, they look down to the government. In the UK and other European countries, we look up to the government. If you're in a country where you look up, the chance of that country changing its trajectory is so unbelievably low, because the citizens don't have the willpower. They view themselves as helpless. They view the government as the solution to everything. Whereas in the United States, if they look down, well, they believe they are the ones in charge, and so they will have that sort of revolutionary or counter-revolutionary spirit, I guess. And so, what I'm trying to say here is, if there's any country that's more likely to start a fire in this regard, with these two political factions going at it, it's the United States. The United States is by far the most likely to start some sort of civil war. And I think that it's, my view, and if I've not made it clear enough already, is that it's inevitable. It's inevitable that the United States goes for a civil war. And the reason for that is because people are too different. The left and right the left used to be about slightly higher taxes and healthcare, and the right used to be about religious values and, that's lower taxes, right? Well, that's completely changed now. The left have gone off the rails because of the Marxist indoctrination. That they've taken over everything, they've degenerated everything. Nothing makes sense anymore, and the right is basically clinging on for dear life. They call them conservatives, but they conserve nothing. I think it's a joke. There's nothing to conserve, and so I used an example. You could have two neighbours, and one's like a biker who smokes every day and has a red MAGA hat. And, he's pro-freedom of speech and likes to go to the gun range on the weekend, and then his neighbour is some soy-drinking millennial who browses Reddit and I don't know, gets off on getting Reddit karma, right? These two people they have completely different worldviews. You could put them in a room and lock the door for a year and they would still come out hating each other, right? Like, there's no middle ground anymore. Like, the Overton window is not just shifted, it's sort of bended. It's like the left and the right now are so different that there's no common ground to possibly be had. And whether you're even if you're apolitical, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you don't ascribe to any of these ideologies. It doesn't matter if you're a far left anarchist or if you're a normal conservative. It doesn't matter, because you will be dragged into this whether you like it or not. Whatever your industry is, it will eventually come under fire from the far left, and you will eventually have to pick a side, whether you agree with these people or you don't. Like, you don't have a choice, is what I'm trying to say. You really don't. I'm not saying that I say I'm trying to force you to do something. I'm saying these people will come for you eventually, if they haven't already, and you will have to pick a side at some point. It's getting out of hand, and year on year on year, more and more people are being dragged into it. And the average person, when they get told what they can and can't say, etc., etc., is not going to stand for it. But besides the point, I think America's the most likely place to have a civil war, and that's why it so fascinates me. And I make no... I don't try to hide that I wish I was American. I've got a massive American flag on the wall, and the reason I do is because I wish that the British still had that spirit that they once did. And they've become more, especially in the South, especially in the London area, which I think is a disgrace. They've lost that British spirit, that sort of English spirit. They've become a lot more mainland European, the sort of bowing before their governments and doing as they're told and buying into it. I wish that the British still had that spirit, whereby they say, no, fuck you, we're not going to take this anymore. And in a way, I guess it definitely is more so than any other European country, as proven by the fact that they've left the European Union. But I wish that we still had that true spirit where everyone was on the same page and everyone still had that common value. Britain has been battered by the far left ideology. But I asked the people of Reddit, which is an extremely left-wing website, by the way, so I'm going to be very surprised about the responses I'm going to get here. Americans, do you think America is heading for a second civil war? And if so, what will start it? So let's see, shall we? Josie13209 says, a war starts when two political powers clash. Who are the political powers here that can declare war? Social unrest is not a war. And I'd say, Josie, I don't know what planet you're living on. Because if you have been so ignorant that you haven't noticed the fact that there are two massive political factions forming in your country that are quite literally at this moment in time at war with one another, I don't know what planet you're on. Whether you like it or not, as I said earlier, you will be dragged into this. Many institutions, all your institutions, are already far left. A lot of your population isn't. How on earth do you not think that there's not two political powers in your country? Do you think that all Americans are united? Do you think you all believe in the same thing? Those times have long gone. You need to get out of your head that a war is between countries only. And a war, it's not. That's why I call it a civil war, civilian war. It's when I say war, I don't literally mean that we're going to have Antifa tanks and tanks with MAGA hats going at it in the streets. That's not what I mean. I mean, across your country, you will have people seizing territory, going at it with one another. But don't think of it in the sense of traditional warfare, because that's not what I mean. Overreacting Panda. No, we aren't heading towards a second civil war. Only people that want something like that are extremists on both sides. Most of the Americans hate the shit that's going on right now with this stuff. The media just ain't showing that the common working class citizen just want to continue their lives. It doesn't get them money, so showing the crazies is the best way to profit. Right, in a way, I agree with you. The media does show the worst of the worst. And I do agree that the average working class American doesn't want a war. Who the hell would want... I understand that. But what I'm saying here, and this is why I think it will happen, I don't think you have a choice. When people will start to destroy your freedom of speech and take your guns away, are you just going to go marching into your own grave? Are you just going to go, well, I don't want a war, I don't want violence, so I guess I'm going to do it? No one wants a war. It's an inevitability. It's something that will just happen. Not because you want it, but because one side cannot be negotiated anymore. There's no middle ground. There is no, yeah, but what about, no, there is none. It's you will do as you're told, or that's it. That's how they see it. And if the average citizen gets told what to do and they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it, especially in America. That's why I talk about the spirit. Maybe in a country like Germany, they would just go, well, okay, yes, of course, anything you want, Merkel, anything. But in America, people aren't going to do that. You can't just go around telling people what to do and expect them to do it. And so I'm not saying, I'm not here advertising a war like, oh yeah, I really want America to have a war, it's going to be great. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's inevitably going to happen, whether you like it or not. Catclaw72 says, I don't think a civil war will happen. No America that I know wants a civil war. and go suck a popsicle if you want one. But bruh, chill. Elections are coming up, and both candidates are terrible. We do not need a fucking civil war happening. Again, I say that, first of all, learn to spell. Secondly, I say the same thing as I did to Overreacting Panda. A civil war is not something you vote on. You know, it's not like you all come together and go, hey guys, who wants to destroy half our country, collapse our economy, make us vulnerable for invasion, possibly lose superpower status, and lead to millions of death? Anyone want that? Because of course only the extremists on both sides are going to go, yeah, I want that, because they hate the other side that much that they're willing to do that. Of course the average person isn't going to do, yeah, that's what we want. It doesn't work that way. It's not democratic. No one votes for a civil war. It happens. It gets to the point where people stop believing in the electoral system. You mentioned the elections. People stop believing in elections. People stop believing in democracy. They stop believing in the government. And they go, fuck it, I'm going to take matters into my own hands, vigilante style. And they do that en masse. That's how civil wars start. It's not something that you decide. It's not like you just wake up one day and go, guys, let's all vote and have a civil war. It doesn't work that way. And Memes and Bees says, no, why would there be a civil war? And some guy called Grissy1 responds, after all, the only group with whom the general population is in opposition are the politicians. We don't need to go to war with them, just vote them out. Again, if it gets to the point, let me put it this way, okay? We all know that the left-wing party in the United States is the Democrat Party. One of the tactics that far-left parties use is they use mass immigration, unfettered mass immigration, to get free votes. Tony Blair, the leader of the Labour Party at the time in the UK, an ex-prime minister, without a doubt the worst prime minister the UK has ever had, by general consensus, left or right, the worst prime minister ever, very unpopular, used this tactic, and openly admitted he used this tactic. The idea is that you go to a war-torn country or a poor place, somewhere like Africa, and or the Middle East, and you get loads of people, and you say, hey, you want to come to this country that's peaceful and isn't at war, and hey, we might even give you some free stuff as well. Maybe you can start a new life here. Of course they're going to say yes. And so they all go there, and we saw this in Europe with the Syrian war, where they go en masse to Western countries. And in Western countries, if you're an immigrant and you've just arrived in wherever you've moved to, and you have two parties to vote for, and one of them let you in and wants to give you free stuff, and the other one wants you to get lost and go back to where you came from, what are you going to vote for? Of course you're going to vote for the left-wing party. And so you're essentially getting free votes. And that's one of the reasons why unfettered mass immigration happens in the United States and Europe. Right, because not only that, because corporations benefit from the free labor as well. But it's a tactic that they use. Let me put this to you: the Democrats do this in California. They do this with the southern border. That's why they don't want a wall there. Because they want free votes. It's a win for them. What happens if this keeps happening, and it gets to the point where newly arrived immigrant populations can change? That they can swing a state from Republican to Democrat, from right to left, just from the newly added population alone. And the Republicans can't ever win an election again with the Electoral College. Do you really think then that Republicans and conservative people are going to start believing in politics and are going to keep playing that game? Do you really think that that's going to keep happening? If they realise that it's been sabotaged, that it's rigged, basically, there's no way they can win. Do you really think that they're going to keep on playing that game? I don't think so. I don't think that the average American will let their freedom of speech be destroyed and their jobs taken and their guns taken away from them, and there's nothing they can do about it, because we all know that if it wasn't for Trump, the Republicans would have swung to the left. They would have pandered to the left. They would have basically but not be a conservative party anymore. Because they would have known that there's no way they would have won with the newly arrived population. When people realise that there's nothing they can do to sort of get the political movements that they want going, they will turn to violence. They will turn to warfare. I don't understand why Americans specifically don't realise that. This isn't. It's not. People always keep talking about politics and politicians, etc., etc. All the politician is someone who pretends to do what you want so that they can get power and money. That's all they are. And if the average and if you have a large influx of an immigrant population, they will pander to them instead. And the average person, the working class American, as you say, will be powerless politically. So what are they going to do then? Do you think they're just going to walk to their deaths? I don't think so. And Jimmy Saul Jean says, Republicans will start one in a few years when even the Electoral College won't save them anymore. That's exactly what I just said. If you know that no political party will do what you want, you will start to get desperate and you will go to extreme measures. But by the way, we've seen this in the UK. Not a civil war in the UK, but why do you think that the UK left the European Union? Right? Why do you think the European Union became such a big deal? I mean, yes, it's a joke, it's a waste of time, I wish it didn't exist, but why do you think that happened? Why didn't this happen in Germany, or why didn't this happen in France? Why is it that the UK specifically that happened? And I'll tell you why. It was actually because of the political sort of climate, the political sort of parties in the UK falling out with one another. It wasn't actually anything to do with the European Union in the first place. The Conservative Party, after Labour won 3 elections in a row, became very left-wing. And this angered a lot of the population who were actually conservative. And so they started voting for another party called UKIP, which was an anti-EU party, sort of to show the Conservatives a lesson. And because the Conservative Party lost so many votes to UKIP, they actually had to they promised an EU referendum if they got a majority. And they didn't expect to get a majority, and they did. And so they had to give the referendum, and guess what? People voted to leave. But that's the only reason the British even got a referendum, because the Conservatives pandered, and they lost votes. And people went to UKIP because of that. If the main political parties are rigged, people will, first of all, they'll go to alternative political routes, and then they will just get desperate, and they'll do whatever by any means necessary to prevent the change that is occurring. And I am gobsmacked. Now, granted, Reddit is a left-wing website, and I think that left-wingers are much less likely to believe a civil war is happening, because I don't think that comes into their mindset, because they don't need to do that. The country is already moving in their direction anyway, because they own all the institutions. They don't think in that way, so of course they would say no. But I'm gobsmacked that absolutely not a single person believes that there's not a civil war coming to the United States. Who knows? I could be wrong. Could be in 10 years from now I look back at this and go, wow, there was nothing. Everything just went back to normal after a while. It was just a temporary spat. But I doubt it. I don't think so. I think that across the United States and to a lesser extent the rest of the Western world, there is going to be absolute upheaval. It's going to be a civil war like none other, like none we've ever seen. Because contrary to popular belief, most civil wars are between just small factions. I think now, because of social media, the internet, the media, the fact that everyone's so interconnected, I think there's more people are going to be pushed into the fray than ever before. I think it's going to be horrendous. And it's not a matter of wanting it, it's a matter of saying, okay, is this going to happen or not? And I think if you dismiss the concept of a civil war happening, I think that you're being naive, and I think that you're a wishful thinker, and I think you're being too optimistic. And people will see over time, over the many months, many years, as these factions get more and more angry, as tensions start to rise, the string starts to burn even more. Eventually, it's just gonna go off the rails. And I think you're very naive if you don't think that.